I think it was the BBC right after the San Bernardino, California mass shooting that put it best. Just another day in the United States of America. Man, just how true those words were. Just stunning in their simplicity, yet so accurate and incredibly spot on. Because in a lot of ways, it was just more of the same old bullshit here in the great old US of A. It is who we are on so many different levels. It really, really is. Yet another mass shooting where people are going to feign outrage and pretend like they care, yet ultimately, absolutely nothing will change and nothing will happen. And frankly, from a standpoint of our country and this American society, if we're willing to stand back and watch as 20 plus kids are shot to death in a school in Newtown, Connecticut, why should we expect us to ever take any action to ever combat this type of problem? You know, same old refrains as always. We're always looking for it to be terrorism, but it's only terrorism if the shooter is not white. If the shooter is white, somehow it always becomes a mental health issue. It's always about certain types of narratives that the media wants to put out there, and certain types of narratives that the idiots that live in this country choose to prescribe to and believe in. And ultimately, when it comes to the whole topic of guns and the gun culture in this country, there's way too much passion, there's way too much emotion on either side of the aisle, either side of the argument, and not nearly enough logic, reason, or decent common good sense. And ultimately, all that happens is every time it's lather, rinse, repeat. A mass shooting happens, the media latches onto it for days, either advances a mental health or terrorism type of narrative, depending on whether or not the shooter is white. Then everybody on both sides of the aisle, both sides of the argument, both sides of the equation gets all ramped up and fucking butthurt and angry and mad. And all they do is foster the same old pathetic, predictable pattern of behavior, which is ultimately nurturing a gun control debate that only benefits two entities. That is the modern day American terrorist organization that is the National Rifle Association and the gun industry. Every time one of these mass shootings happen, it's a great day for the NRA. It's a great day for the gun industry because they know what's going to happen as a result is this artificial bullshit lather, rinse, repeat gun control discussion, gun control debate that's never going to go anywhere, that is only fostered and nurtured by certain interest in the media and within the NRA and the gun industry to help A, drive up television ratings, which it does, B, drive up memberships, in particular lifetime memberships in the NRA and donations to the NRA, which every time these always ultimately do, and C, help ramp up gun sales so that way the manufacturers of guns can make more guns so they can sell them to the gun sellers who can sell more guns. And as always, that predictably happens. That's what it's all about. Every time one of these mass shootings happen, it's all blood money. And the only thing that ever changes in the amount of money in the bank accounts of the NRA and the gun industry, the gun lobby. If you think there's anything other than that going on here, you're foolish, flat out. And again, I love when I listen to the gun discussion on both sides, just how ridiculous both sides, the pro-gun crowd and even the gun control crowd can be, and just the ridiculousness and the stupidity of the way they think. Now, first, I got to go to the pure stupidity of the pro-gun side. And it's just mind-boggling to me to sit there and see something like this continuously happen time after time after time after time. And the major problem with gun violence that we have in this country, and we have had and will continue to have, that will probably only get worse. And yet people on the pro-gun side think everything is fine, that there is nothing wrong, and it just is what it's going to fucking be. They believe that the Second Amendment equates to unchecked, unbridled gun ownership for everybody. No, it doesn't. And frankly, if you actually read the Second Amendment, if you bother to actually read the Constitution, and that all so important second of the first 10 amendments that made up the Bill of Rights, it doesn't say that at all. It talks about how the rights to bear arms shall not be infringed upon. However, it also puts it in the context of the time of the 1780s for the purpose of a well-regulated militia. So it doesn't sit there and say you have the right to own whatever the hell gun you want. Just like many other things, just because there are certain constitutional protections doesn't mean that there aren't certain rules in place that can restrict that. And no, people shouldn't be able to walk around open, freely, willy-nilly with fucking machine guns and freaking AK-47s and AR-15s strapped around their damn shoulder. It's freaking ridiculous. And again, this whole notion that everybody is packing heat is the fucking answer. We did that once in this country. It was called the Wild West. They call it the Wild West for a fucking reason. And can you imagine if everybody today was walking around packing heat? Oh, the only way to stop a bad guy with the gun is to stop a good guy with the gun. Well, look at the frickin' Paris attacks, if you will. It wasn't just that they were shooting people up. You had suicide bombers. So a pistol's going to stop a suicide bomber. How fucking stupid does that sound? This whole notion again. Everybody packing heat. A good guy with a gun stops a bad guy with a gun. We have those people. They're called the police. And it still fucking happens consistently. The last thing we need in a country full of idiots is a bunch of armed idiots. All willy-nilly and shit. And then this whole notion that comes from the pro-gun crowd. The same idiots that give their money to the NRA. To that modern-day American terrorist organization. They believe that the government wants all their guns and won't stop until they take all their guns. Well, ding-dong, dumb dicks, here's a news flash. The American government could frankly give a shit less about your guns. I know it's an inconvenient truth. Maybe, just maybe, you should open up your ears, open up your minds, and remove your head square from the ass of Alex fucking Jones. Because if the government wanted your guns, they would have already had them, period. Furthermore, why would a government feel that they need your guns to control you when they have so many facets that they control your everyday lives? They allow poisons and chemicals to be put in our food. They do so many other different things. You really think the same government that once nuked Japan twice and is still the only country in the history of the world to actually use a nuclear weapon in wartime against another country and did it twice for fucking shits and giggles gives two flying fucks about whether or not you have an AR-15 or an AK-47? Do they really want your guns that fucking badly? Stop with the paranoia and the insanity because you look like a jackass. They couldn't give a shit less about your guns. Because A, if they wanted them, they would just fucking take them because our government over the past 15 years and even longer has done so many things to circumvent our civil rights and our constitutional rights to begin with. Why the hell would you think the Second Amendment would be any fucking different? If they really cared. But they don't. Your government is so beholden, you dipshits, to the freaking NRA, to the gun lobby, that they're not going to take away your guns, and they're in cahoots with these assholes. They help foster this debate so that way the NRA gets more memberships and the gun lobby makes more fucking money. How can you not see this? And this whole notion of that modern day terrorist organization, the NRA, protecting your rights, ain't protecting shit. The only thing the NRA cares about is the NRA and the gun lobby. They want to make sure they get their membership money, and they want to make sure that they use that money that they get wisely for their purposes to help support the gun lobby, who of course is giving them kickbacks. If you believe everything is above water with the NRA and Wayne LaPierre, you're fucking kidding yourself. The NRA protects your gun rights. Bitch, please. And then this whole belief of Obama, the gun-hating socialist. He's such a gun hater. Exactly how many of your guns has he fucking taken away? He's such a fucking socialist that he instituted a Republican healthcare policy in Obamacare, which people seem to forget. That was a Republican policy in the 90s through and through. And it was first instituted at the state level in Massachusetts by a Republican governor in Mitt Romney. Obama is not a gun-hating, gun-taking socialist. He's a faux liberal, mediocre Republican president. It's about high time you people started to realize that and stopped watching Fox News so fucking much and their relentless propaganda machine going against the guy who's been nothing more than a mediocre president. And what I don't understand is, while a lot of people that actually own guns and wouldn't actually ever use them on anybody else unless they actually had any other choice, you have other idiots that sit there and say, you know what? Everybody should be able to have a fucking gun. That includes people on the fucking terror watch list. That includes convicted felons. Everybody should have the right. What the fuck is wrong with you? Like, how do you wake up every day and look at yourself in the mirror and think to yourself that you're on the right side of this issue? You're just not. But then you get the gun control crazies too, that sit there and continue to foster this environment of taking guns away, which ultimately only does what, as referenced earlier, puts more money in the coffers of the modern-day American terrorist organization, the NRA, and helps makes more money for the gun lobby. How can people not see this? This whole notion of taking guns away and banning guns and this and that. It's only serving two masters. It's only serving two purposes, and none of them are any fucking good. It just continues to perpetuate the same cycle that's continuing to go on in this country. And this whole notion of, well, if we ban guns, that will cut down on the violence. If we do some type of buyback program like they did in Australia, that will work. Well, banning all guns, frankly, is not one in an American reality. Number two, I don't think it's a very American concept. Number three, just because it worked for Australia or somewhere else doesn't necessarily mean it's going to fucking work here. It doesn't mean that it wouldn't have some success, but it doesn't mean for sure that it would work. And furthermore, it still doesn't do anything to combat the problems of illegally owned guns. And even if you sit there and institute an assault weapons ban, even if you sit there and you do this, and even if you sit there and do that, how do you combat the problem of illegally owned guns that are brought in from overseas, that are brought in through the Mexican border? Illegally owned guns that are already here, that are on the streets, that are in people's homes, that have been there for years, decades, if not generations. You just going to sit there and storm people's houses and search and seize any guns that they have? That doesn't seem to be a very American concept either. That would seem to be a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment, but what the fuck do I know? You know, the whole thing of assault weapons bans, you know, here's the thing. I agree that not every firearm needs to be freaking legal, and there needs to be some sense of, hey, here's a basic fundamental right to protect yourself. These guns are okay, and once we get outside of that, these are killing machines. These are used for war. Private, regular, everyday citizens have absolutely no fucking purpose owning these guns. I'm down with that. But where is the cutoff point? And how do we enforce this? And how do we deal with all of those guns that would fit into that category that are already there? Many of them, again, not properly registered, not legally purchased. And again, what do you do with the guns that are already owned? If you sit there and do a grandfather plan like you did with the assault weapons ban in the 90s, you're not really doing a whole lot of good. That was part of the problem with that assault weapons ban. There were many problems with it. But two of the major problems were, one, that it was only set up to last a decade. So it was like, hey, we're going to do something about it, but not really ever do anything really truly about it. And number two is it didn't do anything effectively to combat the problem with the guns that are already out there. It was all a future dated thing. There was nothing retroactive. There was nothing to go back and try to fix the mistakes of the past. And even more when we talk about the whole notion of how much of a problem mass shootings are. And I'm not sitting here trying to minimize them. I'm not trying to sit there and say that they're not significant or that it's not a problem. It is a problem. It is a very real and very concerning problem. And for a country that alleges themselves to be such a great nation, for what reason I do not know, to sit there and basically act as if this is okay, that should concern us. We act more like the third world countries we supposedly look at and are better at and like to thumb our nose at than the first world country that we like to prop ourselves at. That's the attitude that we have. But even if you sit there and you ban assault rifles and assault weapons, and even if you sit there and combat guns by taking away some guns and banning certain types of guns, and you want to talk about stopping mass shootings, we're still missing the bigger picture at play here. The gun control crowd does not seem to get this. 2/3 of all gun deaths in the U.S. are suicides. They're not mass shootings. They're not gang murders. They're fucking suicides. Suicides. And I guarantee you far more people are killed every year in this country in terms of homicides in domestic disputes than they are in gang violence and mass shootings fucking combined. This is where we get into the danger zone of when we talk about the numbers and what the numbers really say. And numbers can tell you the truth, but they can also tell you half-truths and false truths. And both the pro-gun side and the anti-gun side will manipulate numbers to try and fit their particular narrative. But what really concerns me is for the side that's supposed to be more logic and reason-based in the gun control side, they seem to miss this very fundamental point that 2/3 of all gun deaths in the U.S. are not homicides, they are suicides. And at the end of the day, sometimes this shit is going to happen. No matter what you do. You know, even if you sat there and banned everything except an old revolver or a freaking pistol that only had a 10-round magazine capacity or a 10-round clip, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes this shit's still going to happen. Sometimes somebody's not going to be in the right place, or somebody's going to get angry, or somebody's going to get pissed off, or somebody wants to get famous, or somebody's just sick and they want to fucking kill people. This shit's going to happen. And sometimes no matter what you do, it's still going to happen. And sometimes I think we lose sight of that. That sitting there and doing some of these things are going to solve all of these problems, or that it's even necessarily solving the right problems. And they're just not. You know, we're not doing anything at all to really combat the mental health crisis in this country. We're not doing nearly enough to combat the domestic violence crisis that we have in this country. All because we get so worried about every time there's a mass shooting, oh, we gotta take away everybody's guns. Or, oh my God, of course it was a Muslim. Gotta be fucking terrorist. Can't be mental health if they're Muslim or Arab. It's only if they're white. If they're white, then it's all right because they sick in the head. Nah. Mass murderers are mass murderers, regardless of the rhyme or the reason. It's about high time we stop coming up with excuses to almost quasi-justify one or make one not seem as bad as the other. I mean, and it's that simple. White people that do mass shootings are terrorists too, because terrorism is about inciting fear. And killing 20 plus kids, if that doesn't scare you, I don't know what the fuck does. Well, frankly, in this country, it's not about who gets killed that incites the fear. It's about the artificial fear of who committed it and why it was committed as to why people are so afraid. And that's where the terrorism comes into this shame. You know, but at the end of the day, the pro-gun crowd, the gun control nuts, you're both fucking nuts, and you're both missing the bigger picture. You really are. Even if you stopped all mass shootings, you still aren't stopping anywhere near the majority of homicides in this country, and you're still doing absolutely nothing to prevent the 2/3 of firearms-related suicides in this country. 2/3 of all gun deaths in this country come from suicides. Focusing on mass shootings is missing the point. Thinking the government wants all your guns with their nuclear arsenal and all the things they do to poison you and corrupt you and control you is missing the fucking point. So I say this, and it all ultimately comes down, as you've heard me explain here, to the stupidity of America's gun culture. There is no be-all, end-all solution. But also doing nothing is complete fucking madness. At some point in time, we've got to get away from the emotions and the passions and start using some goddamn logic and reason and try to come up with some simplistic things that everybody could agree are sensible, that aren't going over the line, that aren't infringing on people's rights, yet at the same point in time aren't allowing unfettered gun access, in particular to the people that have no business having guns. It's that simple. Now, is anything ever really going to change? I don't know, because again, speaking to the stupidity of America's gun culture, I mean, it's embedded in us. It's a big part of who we are, and that's the ridiculousness of it all. We act more like the third world countries we like to look down on than the first world country that we pretend ourselves to be and proclaim ourselves to be. And it's a damn shame. You've got people here thinking that freaking a non-American born Muslim president wants to take all their freaking guns and impose despotic socialism on every freaking buddy. That thinks that everybody packing heat is the answer. That the NRA is actually protecting their rights. Then you got this side here that always engages in the same type of conversation and talking points themselves, all the while knowing that the only two things that they're doing are feeding the coffers of the NRA and the gun lobby, the two things that they proclaim themselves to be against. And all the while completely missing just how intricate and deep-rooted of a problem this is and how many layers, like an onion, there are to the violence problem and the gun violence problem in this country. You know, so, I mean, just a couple of starting points. The Second Amendment is where we need to start. That has to be where we start. The Second Amendment was written in the 1780s in the context of a post-Revolutionary War founding America. The Second Amendment was made vague, as many of the constitutional amendments were made very vague. And to sit there, and sometimes when people say, and I've even been guilty of saying this myself in the past for whatever reason, that the founding fathers knew better. These are the same founding fathers that sat there and said the only people that should be allowed to vote are white landowners 21 and older. These are the same founding fathers that even though they were sitting there and creating a constitution that was supposed to protect the inalienable rights of all man, didn't give women the right to vote, and still protected the institution of slavery for another freaking 70, almost 80 damn years. So yes, the Second Amendment needs to be revisited. It needs to be amended. That should be the 28th Amendment to the Constitution. It needs to be modernized. It needs to have new language that eliminates the militia crap, because otherwise, if we're actually interpreting the Second Amendment based off of what it actually says, then any legal gun owner in this country should also be registered in the National Guard or in the Army Reserves, period, because that's what the amendment actually freaking says. And in today's environment, I do think that's a bit outdated. We do need to make sure that it is updated and modernized, saying that, you know, certain types of individuals, meaning people that haven't committed felonies, that aren't on a terror watch list, you know, that don't have a history of violence, have the right to own certain types of weapons for protection purposes. It doesn't give you the right to have a freaking collection of 50, 60 damn guns. It doesn't give you the right to sit there and say, I get to hunt because of this. It has nothing to do with that. You know, I'm okay with decent people having the right to have a gun of some kind if they choose to protect themselves, whatever the case might be. I hate guns. I despise guns. I think they're stupid. But if somebody else wants to have a handgun in their house locked up and it makes them feel better at night, so be it. Who am I to judge? Who am I to say? And we need to amend the Second Amendment, make it the 28th Amendment to the Constitution, and actually spell out in clear, more simplistic, modern language how the amendment is supposed to be read and be interpreted, but also making sure that it is clearly known that it does not allow unfettered, unrestricted access to any and all guns, and let it be known that there is that right there to ban certain types of weapons that are deemed unnecessary, that are deemed to be nuisances to the greater common good. We must more clearly define the weapons that are legal and then are illegal going forward. We need to hold the gun lobby more accountable, flat out. When they're sitting there and creating these mass killing weapons and they're used in these crimes, why shouldn't people be able to sue them? We do that in the medical field. We do that in all these. Why can't it be any different? You know, and if we find out that gun manufacturers and the gun lobby are doing things to circumvent the law of the land, the Constitution, then they need to be held accountable as such. But in order to do that, we must clearly define the types of weapons that are legal and illegal. Basic pistols and handguns, fine. Shotguns, a certain set of rifles that you might use for, let's say, deer hunting, what have you, fine. So you start getting into the AR-15s and the AK-47s and things like the Tech DC-9, all that shit should fucking be illegal. There is absolutely no good reason for any civilian to have that type of fucking weapon, period. And again, get over this fear that the government wants all your guns because they couldn't care less. But I could care less if 3 of my neighbors have freaking issues and they're sitting there carrying around a bunch of AR-15s in their fucking house. Who knows what the hell they're going to do? We must implement universal background checks for any and all gun-related purchases. How ridiculous is it that you can get more of a background check to go get a freaking job, including an actual background check, a piss test to test for drugs, other types of things as well. But to buy a gun, if you go to a gun show or you buy it online, you've got loopholes where you don't even have to go through a full freaking background check. You go through more of an ordeal and more of a vetting of your background buying a car or a house than you do buying a fucking gun. And unless you're going to shoot freaking homes out of your freaking rocket-propelled home launcher, there seems to be a fundamental fuck-up of the priorities here. Some type of universal background check where anybody that buys any type of weapon, whether it's at a gun store, whether it is at a gun show, whether it is a private purchase, whether it is an online purchase, does not matter. Every single gun bought in this country, there must be a background check done on that individual buying that gun. Frankly, there should be a background check done on the people selling the guns. Everybody that chooses to sell a gun should have to get a license. You have to get a license to fucking fish and hunt. Why can't you be forced, if you're going to sell a gun of any kind in any capacity, to have to get a license in order to sell a freaking firearm that can be used to kill somebody? I don't think this is crazy talk. I don't think this is insanity. I don't think this is a violation of anybody's constitutional rights. Universal background checks for every gun purchase and universal licensing for any and all guns that are sold is mandatory. It's a requirement for any decent thinking fucking society. And on top of that, furthermore, if you find out that people at gun shows, people at gun shops, people that sell them privately online or face-to-face have participated in unlicensed gun sales, if they haven't engaged in actually performing a universal background check, then they need to be held accountable for that, and they need to be made complicit for any type of violent acts that are made with those freaking weapons, period. Because that's the only way any shit is going to change. Once the consequences change and they become real and significant, man, imagine how much the culture of the country would change. And then maybe we could actually look at the greater good elements that need to be put into play here. We need to focus more on prioritizing mental health treatment in this country, better understanding mental health. We need to get more involved with preventing problems that arise out of mental health issues. The same thing with domestic violence. We need to plunk more into domestic violence prevention. We need to plunk more into domestic violence awareness. We need to do more to keep potentially violent individuals in domestic setting from being able to get guns to begin with. We need to do more to combat gang violence in this country. We need to do more on many different levels to help with that problem. The whole point is letting everybody have a fucking gun is not a solution to any damn problem. And taking away all guns from everybody, or most guns from everybody, is not a solution either. And all the while, as long as we continue to foster this type of ridiculous rhetoric from one side or the other, all we are doing again is helping the modern-day terrorist organization, the National Rifle Association, and their butt buddies in the gun industry. I think it's time that American citizens prioritize American citizens over special interests like the NRA and the gun lobby and the gun industry. It's getting out of hand. And it's not just about mass shootings. It's a ridiculous number of gun-related deaths in this country every year, due to homicide, and even worse, due to suicide. But as so often is the case, because of the stupidity of America's gun culture, because of the stupidity of our country as a whole, a lot of volume will be raised temporarily and then go right back down. And the next time it happens, it'll be the same cycle over and over and over again. It will never end. It will never stop. It will never get any better. It will only get worse. And ultimately, absolutely nothing will fucking change and nothing will be accomplished, period.